In early 2025, tensions that had simmered for years reached a breaking point. The country was divided along ideological, economic, and technological lines. As political factions clashed, protests escalated, and fear gripped communities. One spark ignited a conflict that grew to become a civil war. The trigger was a deep-seated dispute over emerging AI technologies and digital control. On one side, the sovereigns, a coalition of traditionalists, tech skeptics, and privacy advocates, sought to roll back the pervasive influence of AI, surveillance, and digital IDs. They believed these systems had created a centralized power, stripping people of their freedoms and turning citizens into mere data points in a vast, automated network. On the other side stood the progressives, who believed that AI and digital governance could create a safer, more efficient world. They saw technology as essential to solving climate issues, economic inequality, and ensuring security in an increasingly complex society. As each side hardened its stance, both began to rally supporters from across the country. Cities became strongholds for the progressives, who deployed AI-driven security drones and sophisticated surveillance systems to secure their control. The sovereigns, drawing strength from rural communities and those wary of centralized governance, formed a loose but determined coalition, relying on encrypted communications and guerrilla tactics to keep their movements undetected. The first major conflict erupted in March 2025, when a progressive-led city tried to enforce biometric checkpoints, making digital IDs mandatory for entry. The sovereigns viewed this as a direct assault on personal freedom. When they attempted to resist, the confrontation turned violent, and what began as a localized clash spread rapidly. As the conflict progressed, the country fractured into zones controlled by one faction or the other. Cities became fortress-like centers of surveillance and high-tech security, while rural areas transformed into havens of self-sufficiency, where sovereign forces embraced decentralized power and minimal technology. Towns caught in between suffered greatly, often forced to adopt policies based on whichever faction was nearby. While each side amassed power, the war took its toll on the infrastructure that sustained daily life. Trade routes were disrupted, supply chains broke down, and information became fragmented, with both sides using propaganda to sway hearts and minds. Internet blackouts and cyber attacks became a standard tactic, sowing distrust and isolating regions from each other. Soon, disinformation filled the void, and communities became suspicious of outsiders and even their neighbors. In the middle of this chaotic landscape, neutral zones emerged. Small pockets of people who refused to pick a side created enclaves known as freeholds. They opened their doors to refugees, people displaced by the conflict, and anyone who wanted to live outside the war's binaries. These communities operated on mutual aid, bartering, and limited use of technology. They became symbols of resilience, and though small, they represented a hope for some kind of future peace. After nearly 2 years of grueling conflict, the toll on both sides became clear. Food shortages and medical crises reached critical levels, forcing both the sovereigns and the progressives to reconsider their objectives. Behind the scenes, leaders from both factions met with representatives from the freeholds, recognizing the need for compromise. In 27, the New Concord was signed, a fragile truce that allowed each faction a measure of autonomy within their zones while creating a loose, decentralized union. Though the truce brought an end to open conflict, the scars of the 25 Civil War remained. The country was no longer a unified entity, but rather a patchwork of ideologies, each coexisting under a tenuous peace. As people began to rebuild, a new generation emerged, shaped by the conflict and driven by a vision of a more balanced society, one that blended the progress of technology with the preservation of personal freedoms. The war had changed the country irreversibly, but the lessons it taught about division, resilience, and the dangers of unchecked power lived on. And for the survivors, this new world represented both a warning and a fragile hope for unity amidst diversity.